Hello everybody and welcome to the fourth subsection of structure. In this fourth subsection, we're going to talk about one more aspect to this, which we call the mentfx block. The mentfx block is another take on the idea of these demand and supply zones in the market, but how you can use these overall zones to actually understand where your potential bias is heading from a structural point of view. Now, the way we do this, and the way you will also learn to do this, and this is going to be their first introduction to it, is understanding that moves happen in myriads of pushes down and pushes up, as we spoke about. So one way to actually view structure, let's actually do this on the 4 hours just to follow it along, is to view it from a standpoint of a move down before a larger move up. So if you take this overall general move down right here and you take it from the top to the bottom, this is what we call a mentfx block. Just like that. It is a large demand zone, which is something we will cover in the future course content, but this is going to be part of given structure. And what I mean by that is it's just a large down candle, right? This whole move down counts as its own large down candle. What you can do is if you go in and follow price along a few times, just like this, you'll actually notice that it will help you predict a given direction for a little bit of a time before it either fails and then continues on an opposite direction. So we're going to take a look at that in just a second right here with all of you. And you'll see how you can use this idea of what we call the mentfx block to decide where structurally we are heading from an institutional order flow perspective. Now, because when we talk about institutional order flow and structure, we understand the two are intertwined in the sense that if there are orders that they have gotten into buys on in all these areas and they're bullish overall, they don't want to move price back below and under these areas, because below those areas they'll be in negative positions for no reason, and instead they will keep price above that, taking out liquidity intermediary just like that, right, with moves right below liquidity, to then continue on higher pushes, and so on and so forth. And that is how they get involved institutionally in structural plays, and that's why structure is important. Now, part of that is understanding that major moves down is the same thing. It's a large sell on behalf of the composite man to come and liquidate all the positions that might be in these areas to then take them to higher points. And that whole area is what becomes what we now refer to as the mentfx block. It's also what is known as a large area of demand. It's just a demand zone that has been increased. And we're going to talk about this as well in the future content, but this is again an important part of structure. So think about this as a large push down. And again, this large push down can come from a myriad of places. You have the decision to use it at multiple places. Either you take this move to the final move down. This counts as what we call a mentfx block. The same way, this will count as well. From this high, right, so let's just expand. From this high to this low is also a mentfx block. From this high, okay, to this low is also a mentfx block. Every single one of these are valid. However, the validity of it is going to be more probabilistic if you use the overall move. And what I mean by that is if we now follow this, right, here's what you'll see. You have a move up. The only time that this overall mentfx block is, or a large demand zone, is validated is when price gets above the high that you use. So in this case, if this is the high and we draw it out, you can see that at all these points, it's invalid, 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 invalid. Even though it got close, it's still invalid, invalid, until right here. And this is the first time this area has become valid. And what that means to us is that this mentfx block has now been printed bullish. And the expectation of it is that price should never get below this area here unless it wants to shift bearish. So if we follow this, you'll see exactly where price came. There it is, into the block before continuing higher. That's the mentfx block right there, originated from supply and demand and larger demand zones. So if we follow this up and use the last move up, right, so here's the last move, and follow that all the way down to the last move down right there, and then follow that to the validation of it. So notice how at this point, the same way we looked at it back here a second ago, all these points were invalid, 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 until right here where it became valid. The same way we have this right here. We have all this being invalid, 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 invalid. So at all these points, you don't have to do anything unless you bought down here from this overall structural mentfx block, which is based again on a large demand zone. And here it becomes valid. As soon as it becomes valid, this entire area is now technically the new sole area where smart money or order flow doesn't want to get below, because if they're bullish, getting below here is going to be negative. So notice what happens. Price comes into this area and trades higher. Now, the same way we looked at everything just now, we take the high, okay? We follow that to the low, just like that, and we draw it out. Now, if we draw out the high above it, you'll see it's invalid, 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 until right here, this wick made it valid. So that means at this point that price, if it wants to maintain bullish, should never get back below this point here. And as a result, you can see that it comes in wicks, right? So again, if we follow price, came up, actually right here, it came up, came and wicked it, and then went higher. So the reality is it actually worked as its own mentfx block, and we can draw that again. So if we draw that from here to here, that counts as a mentfx block, but notice how it never became validated. If price came above here, if price traded above this area, then we'd be valid to look for buys from these areas here, anywhere inside this whole thing, right? So imagine, so for a second, forget about all of the candlesticks in here and think about the fact that we are printing large areas of demand known as the mentfx block. So we called it this because I don't have any other name for it, because no one else talks about this anywhere else. And we're going to talk about this more in the webinars to explain it away and to help a lot of you understand it on a deeper sense. But the idea is, again, price should, if it comes up here, it shouldn't get below this. But as you can see, it doesn't. And instead it breaks down. Now, as it breaks down, you have the same thing that we just looked at. So the reality is, let's say we used this one right here, this overall one. So the second that one became invalid was at this point right here. So again, this was all, it was valid for bullishness. It was all invalid, 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 invalid until right here. That's where it became valid for bearish pushes. So at this exact point, we could say that on the 4 hour, using the mentfx blocks, we have shifted bearish. And what you'll do is if you draw the last up move, so that can be from here, from here, from here, or from here, it's up to you. But let's use the overall move to the top. That's your move up before the large move down. That's your supply zone now, right? It's a large supply zone from which you expect sells to happen at. And notice what happens to price. It validates, and then look what it does. It climbs up into this area and then drops off. Now, the same thing happens. You take this area from the low to the high. That is now a new mentfx block that is part of this bearish push. And now, using what you understand, structure should hold just below here, because this is where they have the most of their sell orders that they've entered and that they don't want to exit, because above here, they'll be shifting back bullish. And notice what happens. Price falls down, comes and tests it, and continues lower. So that one worked again, and it held. That's the second one that held. We can follow this. Find the low. So now again, there's a few options. Make sure you watch this video all the way through, because there are a few options that will answer your questions concerning mentfx blocks. And this now forms a new supply zone. The move is from here to up here. That's a move. Or you can use this from here to here. I will use the overall one because those are more probabilistic. However, you can use any low swing that was created before the move up into a previous zone. And again, we're using it to the wick, as you can see, to the wick. Now, the second it becomes valid is only when it trades below this point. So everything inside here is not valid yet. Okay, so this is all invalid, 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 invalid until this low is made. The second this low is made, the second even this is broken, again, it does not have to close. All it has to do is wick it, just like it did back here. The second it wicks it or closes, that's validated, which means you can expect sells from this general area, because structurally, order flow has still remained bearish on this specific time frame using these mentfx blocks. Okay, so you have this move up, as you can see, you highlighted just like so, and again, the same thing occurs. It's only valid once this low is created. So the second this low is moved through, this becomes valid, and as you can see, it comes up, tests it, and then does not break down lower. So this next one does not become valid. However, The second we get back above here, we have shifted bullish using mentfx blocks. And we can see that by taking the high to the low, any way you want. And now it's only validated when this trades above. So this is all invalid, 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 valid. And at that point, you can be a buyer inside of this overall demand zone, which is a mentfx block. Now, notice that if we just follow it like this, you'll see that it does not always work. Now, it worked 1, 2, 3, 4, then failed once, 5, 6, failed twice. So it's about a 6-2. So that's a 3-1. It's about a 66% win rate, which is actually very high. And some people have tested this even lower and it's become even higher. So we have tested this and it works. But even though we've done that, you need to go in and do it yourself, because this can happen along all time frames. Like we said before, we are only operating on one time frame right now, but the same way that we do this, if you get down to a 15-minute, for instance, right, you have the same thing happening. And what I mean by that is if we just follow this along the same way we just did, notice what happens. We have the final down move, right, from here to here. It's validated with this, it tests it, continues. Again, we have the final down move, it tests it, continues. Then it kind of comes up for a while, comes down, comes up, and finally it's created a new one. Big down move, comes up, validates it, and look what it does. It tests it, creates a new down move, comes up above it right here, validates it, and tests it, creates a new down move from here to here, right? You can see what happens in the future, of course. Comes down, tests it, creates a new down move from where? From here to here. What does it do? Never really comes back to test it, takes off for a while, but in the future, where is it that it tests? That next area that never got tested, right? So you can follow these ideas, these mentfx blocks, which are just big demand zones where a lot of orders were sent to the market, to look for potential bias in addition to structure. So the reason I'm showing you this is because, again, it's up to you if you want to use it or not. It's actually a very good tool. I use it myself often. But if you use it on its own, it's not as good as if you use it with the idea of now what you have to be higher time frame structure plus the validation of candlestick structure, right? So that's the idea of, for instance, bullish, 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 expect bullishness, right? It works perfectly. Along with the idea of mentfx blocks printing for you where exactly structure may want to head. So this gets validated, then it finally gets traded through right here. So it actually does not hold, becomes bearish, right? The bearishness holds for a while, which is part of these bearish moves here. Then what does it do? Last move down right here, as you can see. Okay, last move down. When does it get validated, right? So start asking yourself these questions. All invalid until this high is made. The second this trades through it, this is valid. Price comes back into it, trades higher. Where's the last down move into it? Right here, right? From this wick to here. There it is. That's your last down move. Trades higher. What can you expect? For it to come back into here and continue. Bullish. Now, because you're watching it, it's becoming bullish overall using these points, and now it's making a big push down into here. What can you expect? Bullishness from here. Now, if you're not sure, you can confirm it, right? How do you confirm it? You can go lower and find this exact same thing inside of here, or you can already confirm it with the idea of structure shifting. So bullish, 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 valid bullish structure. So now we have, think about this. We have valid bullish structure from this setup here, right? Right there. On top of that, we have valid bullish structure from the overall bullish pushes on the overall diagram. On top of that, we have potential higher time frame bullish structure. And on top of that, we have the mentfx blocks, which have shifted bullish and have left a mentfx block here that has not yet been tested. So we come into it, we come off it, and you have opportunities in here to get into crazy and really good buys. Now, the same way we can keep following this mentfx block, right? This down move into this mentfx block happened from here to here. When does it become valid? Right here, right? The second that becomes valid, what can you look for? Buys from anywhere in here to get higher. And notice what happens. Price comes into it, tests it, which is part of that other bullish move, and continues higher above those points again. So this is the idea of using large demand and supply zones, aka what we call the mentfx blocks, because they're just easy to call them that, to gauge where structure may want to head. Because why does this work? Because when they have this many cells, or I guess let's use one that actually worked. When they have this many cells that they send into the market, right? They need to mitigate a lot of those cells. So when they get back above, those cells are being mitigated by these major moves to then continue to higher bullish structure. And that is how order flow holds, just using mentfx blocks. So you have to tie those all together to potentially see where structure wants to head. And this was all done only on one time frame. Now, again, like I said, if you get to a lower time frame, even a 5 minute, you'll see the same thing repeat over and over again. So let's just start from somewhere in here, right? Let's imagine this to be your last area that is a supply zone, right? So this is a supply zone where you're expecting potential sells from. And again, we're going to talk about these soon. Where's the last up move before the down move? Right here. Here's your last up move before this down move occurred. Great. Let's draw that out. Here's your mentfx block. Now, when does that become valid? Only when price gets below this point. So all of this price action in here is actually invalid for this mentfx block. And the second it gets below here is when this mentfx blocks become valid. And this whole area becomes what? Valid for sells. Now notice the sell that we had here. That sell was also partly based on the idea that overall institutional order flow on this specific time frame, the 5 minute, using this specific mentfx block, had shifted bearish and should hold above here. So because of that, we partnered that with that idea of where another supply zone inside it was. And with that, as price moved away and began to validate bearish structure, right? Move down, move up, move down, valid bearish structure. We looked to get involved in these cells here and took them to the downside. Okay, and again, we're gonna talk about this a little bit more, but if there's any confusion concerning anything with structure, make sure you make use of every team thought channel that we have in the mentorship, and you make use of the webinar questions, and you come to the webinars and ask the questions that you need answered for yourself, because we have no problem working through some of this stuff and even showing you it work back to back. And there are many people that have tested these and they work if you dedicate your time to seeing them and to confirming them. Okay, so price breaks down, right? As it breaks down, where's the last down move? Right here. Oops. Where's the last down move? Right here. Into the previous mentfx block to right here, right? So this whole thing was a mentfx block and we just came up into it. And when does it become valid? Only when price trades below this point. So all of this price action in here was invalid for a mentfx block. Invalid, 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 blah, 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 until right here. This is where it becomes valid. The second it becomes valid, you can already begin to anticipate potential bearishness if price is to come back into this zone. So again, remember, we have just been switching between multiple time frames, but even though we've done this, the concept has remained and reigned true across every single time frame thus far. So with that in mind, notice what we have as well. We have a push down, a retracement that didn't get above here, right? So we have almost valid bearish structure. Boom, we have bearish structure. So not only do we have this overall bearish move, not only do we have the higher time frame bearish moves, but we also have this validated bearish structure using our candlestick structure. So this is why I stress that you take notes and watch through every single video we've made so far on structure for this specific section 1 of the entire mentorship. And still, we haven't even touched on section 2 and 3. So make sure you're paying attention, make sure you're testing this, because it's all there and it's all for you. Now, notice what price does. Price comes right back up into that area, creating what? Here's the last down move into the up move. This is again a area of supply. This is a supply zone, or what we call it, a mentfx block. The last up move before the down move. When does this mentfx block become valid for sells? The second we get down below this area. So this is all invalid until boom, it's valid right there. Now, notice what it does. It breaks down, and what has it done after? It breaks down, and it also has created that same thing where we've created structure that is bearish with the candlesticks, but our overall bias on the 5 minute structure, if we're trading the 5 minute time frame on the specific time frame, is bearish, right? And also, as we're doing this, think back to the first teaching we had where we spoke about structure being put into place, and think about structure just from a standpoint of the large bulbs. Here's a push down, here's a retracement. Price shouldn't get below there, but notice that's the same as the mentfx block. Here's a push down, Here's a retracement. Notice it's the same as the mentfx block. Here's a push down, right? Here's a retracement. Notice it's the same as the mentfx block, okay? Here's a push down. Here's a retracement. It should never be above this. Notice what that is. That's going to be a new mentfx block. Here's a push down. What can you expect? The exact same thing. For a new lower high to be printed anywhere in this area before lower prices are met. Now again, just structure is not enough to predict where this specific zone may happen for those bearish continuations, which is why we will in the future complement that with our other understanding of Wyckoff and supply and demand zones. This is why every single aspect of what we're teaching here is vital to your understanding of the overall mentfx strategy and to how we get involved in the market. So now what's interesting is this move up into this mentfx block has multiple mentfx blocks. So even though the overall structure, right, had followed suit with the mentfx blocks, as so, just like that, this one is the first one where it might not. And what I mean by that is this right here is actually your last mentfx block, right? Or this is, right, that low. Or this is that low. Or this is. This is where it becomes a little bit dynamic. You can ask yourself which block you want to use, which low you want to use to show yourself the mentfx block. If you're someone that wants better RR or something, right? If you're somebody that wants better RR or something, then you would use potentially, like I showed you, these lows here. And what that means is you're still expecting this bearish move from an area in here, which is below this overall bearish push, but now it's part of this zone here instead of this overall area here where you don't know exactly where it can play off of, right? And again, there's going to be more confirmations to this, but this is, again, how you want to view structure. And this is how you can use the mentfx block, which again is a supply or a demand zone based on if you're bearish or bullish to determine where institutional order flow is and where they want to hold their orders unless they want to invalidate their entire direction on a given time frame that you're looking at, right? The same way we're looking at all this, if we went to the daily, you have the same thing happen, right? You don't have to make it complex. And what I mean by that is if we just even take a look right here, right? What do you have? You have your last down move right here. It becomes valid when price trades above this point. So right here, right on these high, right there on that high is become valid. Look what it does. It comes into it, trades off it, continues higher, right? Very simple. Now, what's also interesting is if you actually got even a little bit higher, maybe like a 3-day, now the mentfx block can change, right? It's from this high, that's the last high, to the low. There's your mentfx block, right? Here's your push higher, your structural push higher. So again, remember, if you wanted to highlight even structure, you have a low, a high, a low, a high, a low. Notice how that plays in with the mentfx block, a high, and now you're expecting what? Pushes into here to continue higher, right? And look what this move here was. That wick came right inside here. And those are already areas where you can expect potential bullishness. So you already have a bias that you're building on this because you have the access to all these tools. Now, part of your arsenal is understanding that structure can be seen through the use of candlestick structure, through the use of overall institutional structure, which can be partnered with potential mentfx block structure, which can also give you even better entries on the inside of price, okay? So thank you so much for watching. I hope this made sense about mentfx blocks. If it didn't, please let me know. Please at me in the chats, and we will talk about this in the private webinars down the line. So thank you so much. This is how you utilize a mentfx block. These are how they are printed, and this is how they are printed on every single time frame you potentially look at, and how you can continue to follow them all the way down or all the way up, right? So excuse me, I'm sorry, but like even if you study some of the price action in here, and you just notice the overall mentfx blocks, right? Here's your last down move, and we just draw that out. You can see that as a mentfx block holding, right? You have the same thing here. You could have used this whole thing from up here to down here. Whoops, let's delete that. From up here to down here, that's a mentfx block. Price gets above it, validates it right. Oops. Price gets above it and validates it right here, comes back into it, tests it, continues. Makes a new mentfx block, continues. Fails finally, shifts bearish, 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 confirms it with all the validation structures and validation things that we've looked at in the past. So make sure you watch every single subsection. Make sure you take notes on that. And that is part 1, section 1 of structure for the mentfx way of trading. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the Sunday webinar. Thank you all.